Hello and welcome back to Adult Bible Studies, or welcome to Adult Bible Studies if this is your first time to be here. I'm Wayne Williams, the leader for this time of Bible study, and uh, I'm glad that you could take part in this study this week. It's a part of a series of lessons that we're looking at from the book of Esther. Not a book that we spend a whole lot of time in these days, and yet a beautiful story that really has a lot to say to us about the range of feelings and emotions that we go through as God's people. As life tests us, as circumstances test us, as situations change, how do we deal with those things as people of faith? Esther is a good example of that kind of thing. You may, if you listened to last week's lesson, you know a little bit about the background of the book of Esther. If you didn't, I want to give you just a little snippet here. First of all, we have uh, Mordecai and his family, a Jewish family living in Persia. This is probably a Jewish family who decided rather than return to Jerusalem with Nehemiah and Isaiah and work on rebuilding the temple, they decided to stay in Persia. Perhaps they had jobs, businesses, other things that uh, enticed them to stay there. But nonetheless, they were Jews still living in Persia, even though they had been freed by Cyrus, the king at the time that Persia overcame the Babylonians, to go back to Jerusalem if they wanted to. So here we have this Jewish family living in Persia. Some of the key actors in this drama are, first of all, the king of Persia at that time, King Ahasuerus, who was also known as King Xerxes. Xerxes is the name used most often, but nonetheless, uh, he's the king of Persia at this time. Then there's Haman. Haman is Xerxes' right hand man, his number one assistant, number one advisor. Uh, he's the one that does the things that the king wants, and he has almost the full authority of the king in the things that he does. Then we have Mordecai. Mordecai, again, is this Jewish man and his family who are living in Persia. Mordecai has adopted a niece named Esther. Esther's family was killed, and Esther was homeless, and so Mordecai brought her into his family and raised her. Uh, there came a time, though, when the king was looking for a new queen. He had a parting of the ways with this current king, current queen, and was uh, looking to get someone to fill that role again. And so they had something, what we call a beauty contest, perhaps, where they went out and solicited all these young women to come in and present themselves kind of as you would do in a beauty contest. Here are my talents, here are my strengths, here are the things I can do, here's my knowledge base, here's all those kinds of things. Well, the end results of it was is that Esther, this Jewish girl, was chosen by Xerxes to be his queen. Mordecai, her uncle, knowing that the Jews were not a real popular group of people in the Persian Empire. Nonetheless, they weren't enemies of the Persians, but at the same time, they just weren't that popular. He counseled Esther on keeping it quiet that she was from a Jewish background, and she did that. And so she and King Xerxes were married and had an ongoing relationship, and things were cooking along pretty good. On the other hand, Mordecai, being a Jew, was finding it impossible to follow some of the rules that the Persians were enforcing. Remember, it's kind of like Daniel in Babylon, where the king made this idol of himself, and everyone was to bow down before that idol. And Daniel says, "I can't do that." Well, Mordecai had faced a similar situation in that Haman, this king's right hand man, had issued an edict that he was to be responded to as though he was a god. When he came around, people were to bow down and show homage to him. And Mordecai refused to do that. And word got back to him that Mordecai was refusing to do this. And Haman not only got mad at Mordecai in an individual sense, he got mad at the Jews. He says these Jews are just such stubborn people. They won't go along to get along. They're always uh, ruffling the feathers of everything, everybody, and everything. And so he goes to King Xerxes and he says, I want to issue an edict that we're just going to exterminate the Jews. We're just going to wipe out the Jews that are still scattered within the Persian kingdom, the ones who stayed here. We're just going to get rid of those people because they're just nothing but rebel rousers and keeping things uncomfortable. And the king agreed and gave Haman the authority to do that. Well, news of this edict reached Mordecai, and Mordecai put on what we saw last week, sackcloth and ashes, and went before the gate to the king's castle and was there lamenting and praying and just really making a public show of his grief and his heartbrokenness at the way the Persians were going to treat the Jews. The Jews hadn't been at this point attacked because Haman put into his edict that he wanted all the Jews to be killed in all the areas of the Persian Empire on exactly the same day. Now, why he would do that, I don't know. But he did do it that way. And so they had a little leeway in between the edict being issued and it actually being undertaken. And it was during that time that Mordecai went before the gate and was put with sackcloth and ashes, praying and lamenting about the way the Jewish people were to be treated. Well, word of this got back to Esther, and Esther sent her sage, her squire, her attendant, her eunuch is what they're called here in Persia, and her faithful messenger named Hathach to see Mordecai. Some of these names get real twisted around, don't they? Hathach went to Mordecai and he says, "What's up, man? What are you doing this for? What's going on?" And Mordecai sat down with Hathach and he just filled his ear full about this edict that Haman had issued and how all the Jews were to be killed, and their days were numbered and they were just waiting for the final axe to fall. And so Hathach took this message back to Esther. Esther was very brokenhearted about this because these were her people. And she and Mordecai had a following meeting after that. And it's at that meeting that Mordecai presented to Esther a thought. He says, "Esther, you're in the prime position to advocate for your people. You've never represented your people by choice, by wisdom, by understanding that that wasn't a good thing to do. But nonetheless, now is a time when it is very necessary and very appropriate for you to step forward and say, King Xerxes, Esther, your wife, need to be honest with you and tell you that I'm a Jew and I fall under this edict as well as the rest of the Jews in Persia do." And she hesitated because it wasn't appropriate for the queen, anyone, to go before the king unless they had been summoned. And that's where our passage takes up today. We looked at the first few verses of chapter 4 of the book of Esther last week. We're going to look at verses 10 through 17 this week. Let's just read through those together. Verse 10, Esther chapter 4. In reply to this request of Mordecai, Esther ordered Hathach to tell Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people in his provinces know that there's a single law in a case like this. Any man or woman who comes to the king in the inner court without being called is to be put to death. Only the person to whom the king holds out the gold scepter may live. In my case, I haven't been called to come to the king for the past 30 days. So I'm not sure that the king and I are on the best of terms. There must be something going on between he and I in addition to this. And so it makes me a little uncomfortable and a little uncertain about taking on this mission." Verse 12 says, "When they told Mordecai Esther's words, he had them respond to Esther. Don't think for 1 minute that, unlike all the other Jews, you will come out of this alive simply because you are in the palace. In fact, if you don't speak up at this very important time, relief and rescue will appear for the Jews from another place, but you and your family will die. But who knows? Maybe it was for a moment like this that you came to be part of the royal family. This is one of those gems that's hidden away in the Old Testament, a statement of faith, a statement of theology, of understanding of God, a statement that just puts it all together in such a powerful and unique sort of way. Mordecai's talking to Esther. Maybe it was for just a moment like this. How many times have you and I heard, perhaps this is exactly what God placed you here for? And that thought came forth from the words of Mordecai, where we stop and we think for a moment. Even bad situations may be a situation in which God has placed us or allowed us to be in because He intends to do something through us, and we as His people will represent Him in that situation in a way nobody else can. What a powerful thought! God can take us even in a bad situation and use us, use our testimony. That's the very seed thought that has kept missionaries and martyrs and others all across countless centuries aware of the reality that God is with us. And who knows, perhaps it was for just this purpose that God placed you in this point, in this time, in this situation, in your position, and with your particular resources to be a part of the solution to the problem. And what Esther had talked about so far is the feeling, the emotion that we're going to focus on today, and that's the emotion of fear. Last week we focused on grief and anxiety as they heard about this edict and all the things that were going on. And grief and anxiety are certainly strong and powerful emotions. Fear is equally a powerful emotion. Esther realizes, hey, yes, I'm here in the palace, and yes, there are some things that I have the potential to do, but I'm not sure that I can do those things. I'm afraid. I'm concerned. I don't know how it's going to work out. If the king doesn't uh, point towards me with the scepter, I'll be put to death right then, right there. It doesn't matter that I'm the queen. They said the law says no one can come into the king's presence without his bidding them to come. And Mordecai turns that around and brings it back to her. Who knows, Esther? Maybe this is exactly what God has been calling you to do. Have you ever been thinking about, Lord, sometimes I'm just not sure where I'm at, why I'm here, and why I am who I am, and why I am with this in the circumstances that I am, and I'm just not sure how you're going to use me in this. But who knows? God may have a plan. God probably does have a plan to utilize us in a special way, and that's why we are exactly where we are and who we are. Verse 6, verse 15. Esther sent back this word to Mordecai. Go gather all the Jews who are in Susa, that's the capital city. Tell them to give up eating to help me be brave. She's calling for a fast. She's calling for a prayer time and a fast. What a wonderful statement of faith. We need to seek God's will in this. I am fearful. Fear could lock me up. Fear could keep me from doing what needs to be done. So what do? I don't just wallow in my fear. I take it to God. And I ask others to take it to God with me. And for us to do those things that prepare our hearts and allow us to reach out to God in a significant way. We fast and we really focus our attention on bringing this concern to God and keeping our eyes and ears and senses open to the possibilities of how God is going to move in this situation. Tell them to give up eating to help me be brave. They aren't to eat or drink anything for 3 whole days, and I myself will do the same along with my female servants. Then, even though it's against the law, then, even though I know the law says I shouldn't, that there's dire consequences for doing this, I will go to the king, and if I am to die, then die I will. So Mordecai left where he was and did exactly what Esther had ordered him. Fear and an appropriate response to fear. Esther was afraid. Esther didn't know what to do. Esther realized what Mordecai said about her being the right person at the right time and in the right place, possibly, and yet it still didn't feel right to her as a human being, knowing the potential consequences. And so, what did they do? They gave it to God. Give it to God. Let go. Let God take care of those fears and those anxieties, those things that leave us just so uncertain and so unable to make that final decision. Do like Esther. Pray about it. Give it time. And when you've prayed about it, and when God speaks, and when you're more comfortable with the idea that, hey, this is God's way of doing things, and uh, while it really calls for a lot from me, it calls for a lot of faith from me too. And I trust God, and I know God loves me, and I love God. And together we're going to get through this. If I die, I die. Countless martyrs throughout the ages have done exactly the same thing, saying, if my death will be an example to anyone and allow them to open their hearts to God, then perhaps my death will have served a unique and special purpose. I'm reminded of Jesus on the cross and one of the soldiers who came by, especially as the skies darkened in that setting, and he looked up and he said, surely this man was the Son of God. Even in death, we have a testimony. It's not just death, it's life. And how we live life. Do we live life in fear of death, or do we live life knowing that life is full of opportunities and full of possibilities, and we keep our eyes and ears open and allow God to direct us and guide us? What a wonderful story about fear and facing fear. There's a little background passage from Psalm 56 that's also included in today's lesson. It's just a little snippet of some verses from Psalm 56, verses 3 and 4 and verse 11. But listen to them and listen to what they say. Whenever I'm afraid, I put my trust in you, in God, whose name I praise. I trust in God. I won't be afraid. What can mere flesh do to me? I trust in God. I won't be afraid. What can anyone do to me? What can other people do that would usurp the will of God, that would be greater than God's blessing to me as a person? How can anyone, any other human being, take that away from me? God has given me the gift that only God can give, and I trust Him, and I won't be afraid. I won't be afraid of you. I won't be afraid of this circumstance. I won't be afraid of this diagnosis. I won't be afraid of what's going on in my world and how it just seems like things are just total chaos at this time. Instead, I'll let that fear, that concern, drive me to my knees and call upon me to pray fervently and seek God's will and ask for God's peace in my own heart and in the hearts of others dealing with this situation as well. Today, we've looked at a lesson about letting go of fear. Fear is inevitable. There's going to be those situations that just blow us away. but letting it go, learning how to deal with it appropriately by giving it to God, who alone is the only one who can often do anything about the situation in any way. God bless you in this week ahead. Pray without ceasing. Give thanks. Rejoice evermore. For this is God's will for you in Jesus Christ, his Son. Amen.